The origin of journalism as a whole is rooted in the invention of the printing press. This innovation removed literacy from the hands of aristocrats and passed it along to those of middle and lower classes in the 15th century in Europe. The press made it economically possible to sell information to people, which marked the end of the word-of-mouth era of storytelling. The rumors and stories told between people could now be presented in a more formal and therefore more convincing manner. As Joanna Burkhart puts it in Combating Fake News in the Digital Age, the invention of the printing press and the concurrent spread of literacy made it possible to spread information more widely. Those who were literate could easily use that ability to manipulate information to those who were not literate. As more people became literate, it became more difficult to mislead by misrepresenting what was written. New York newspaper moguls William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer used a type of reporting called yellow journalism. This was journalism of the 1890s that used melodrama, romance, and hyperbole to sell millions of newspapers. Their sensationalized headlines and false but catchy stories were one of the main triggers of the Spanish-American War. Yellow journals like the New York Journal and New York World relied on sensationalist headlines to sell newspapers. Hearst understood that a war with Cuba would not only sell his newspapers, but would also move him into a position of national prominence. It was the sinking of the battleship Maine in Havana Harbor that gave Hearst his big story, war. After the sinking of the Maine, the Hearst newspapers, with no evidence, unequivocally blamed the Spanish, and soon U.S. public opinion demanded U.S. intervention in the war. Fake news can be unintended or intentional, and history proves that. You can take, for example, the election of 1948. On November 3, 1948, the Chicago Daily Tribune editors were so certain of the outcome of the previous day's presidential election that they published the paper with a headline stating, "Dewey defeats Truman." An iconic picture shows President Truman holding up a newspaper with the erroneous headline. The caption for the picture quotes Truman as saying, "That ain't the way I heard it." The paper, of course, retracted the statement and reprinted the paper with the correct news later that day. Some fake news authors had no intention of harming anyone or anything, as evidenced by this Chicago Daily Tribune mistake. Others went out of their way to produce damaging false information about people or groups to blackmail or condemn them for acts they didn't even commit. Both the intended and unwanted consequences of fake news were powerful even in the era before internet. In mid-2016, a stream of entirely fabricated stories began to pop up that seemed to originate from the small Eastern European town of Veles, Macedonia. BuzzFeed's media editor Craig Silverman and a colleague began to investigate, and shortly before the 2016 U.S. election, they distinguished at least 140 fake news websites, which were pulling in enormous numbers from Facebook. The young people in Veles may or may not have had such interest in American politics, but because of the money they made via Facebook advertising, they wanted their fiction to travel widely on social media. The U.S. presidential election, and specifically Donald Trump, was, and of course still is, a very hot topic in social media. And so the Macedonians and other purveyors of fakery wrote stories with headlines such as "Pope Francis shocks world, endorses Donald Trump for president," and "FBI agent suspected in Hillary email leak found dead in apparent murder-suicide." The use of the fake news terminology in the 21st century was sparked by the recent defeated 2016 presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, her use of the phrase in a speech in which she mentioned the epidemic of malicious fake news and false propaganda that flooded social media over the past year. "It's now clear that so-called fake news can have real-world consequences," she said. "This isn't about politics or partisanship. Lives are at risk. Lives of ordinary people just trying to go about their days to do their jobs and contribute to their communities." Little more than a month passed before President-elect Trump took up the phrase in early 2017. When questioned by CNN reporter Jim Acosta, Trump reported by saying, "You're fake news." Soon after, he began to use the term on his already accusatory Twitter page in an attempt to invalidate any arguments against him. One of his first tweets that included this term was backlash against the Trump-Russia collusion conspiracy, and he posted it on January 10, 2017, reading, "Fake news, a total political witch hunt," in all caps. The next day, he wrote another, writing, "I win an election easy, it's a great movement, verified, and crooked opponents try to belittle our victory with fake news. A sorry state."